I'm Brent Willis. At 29, I had a serious problem, a cheating wife. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, a disclaimer. I've never been strong in English, literature, or the social sciences. I'm a mathematician, an economist, a businessman. Don't be offended by my inability to use flowery language or give tantalizing descriptions of people or events, because I'm a just the facts kind of guy. In addition to what I described in the previous paragraph, I feel I need to tell you honestly about my strengths and weaknesses, without false modesty about the strengths and without downplaying or sugarcoating the weaknesses. I am very good-looking, successful in business, trustworthy, treat everyone with respect regardless of their position in society, and have almost always been honest. I'm a very attentive lover and put my partner's satisfaction above my own. I am gentle during lovemaking. 6 of the 7 women I have had sexual relations with have always told me this, and I believe it is a real plus. I left them quite satisfied with each encounter. For one woman who really liked it rough, I was a big disappointment. Also, perhaps because of some of the above characteristics, the parents of all the women I dated loved me. Sometimes I think the mothers liked me more than the daughters. Ha ha. As for my negativity, I am hopelessly unathletic and not very receptive. I am easily hurt by negative comments or actions of others. I have a delicate nature, and I often hide my emotions. Despite average physical strength and agility, I avoid physical confrontation and am not aggressive enough in any area of life except business and investing. Despite my lack of aggressiveness, I am genuinely vindictive towards people who wrong me, and, unless I am in physical danger, seek revenge. Details of my interactions with the 2 main characters in this story, Melissa Thompson and Doreen Bronson, in the distant past, would contribute nothing to this story and would bore you. So I'll tell you quickly and simply. I dated Melissa in college when I was in my final year of college, but we broke up just before the summer. It was complicated for me, but not devastating as it was mostly mutual. She was more commitment-prone than I was, but never hid it from me or cheated. I met Doreen the summer after my freshman year. Melissa, Doreen, and I attended different high schools in the same neighborhood, and all attended a nearby large public university. I dated Doreen exclusively during the summer and in the middle of my senior year when Melissa re-emerged on the scene. I dated both of them. I didn't hide it from either of them, until just before graduation, when both gave me the ultimatum to shit or get off the pot. It was a tough choice. Both of them are beautiful and sexy, but Melissa a little more so. Both seemed to really have a crush on me, but Doreen a little more. Both are smart and come from good families. Although it didn't matter, Melissa's family is extremely wealthy and Doreen's is upper middle class. Sex with both of them was great, but perhaps with Melissa it was more satisfying for me. Although from Melissa's point of view, the sex was rated a 9 out of 10, while from Doreen's point of view, it was a 10. Doreen was always frank about everything. Melissa was considerably less candid, although I never once accused her of lying. I chose Melissa. Doreen was depressed and didn't even attend the graduation ceremony, and I heard from friends that she moved out of the area shortly after graduation. I also met with Doreen's parents, Tom and Lydia Bronson, after I broke up with her, as they and I had a good relationship. They realized how sincere my affection for Doreen was, and how difficult the decision was for me, and we parted on good terms. Melissa and I were married 6 months after graduation and lived in the same metropolitan area where we grew up, in an apartment her parents, Jack and Carolyn Thompson, had bought as a wedding gift. Melissa's parents really liked me, even more than the parents of most of the other women I dated. Melissa's mother, Carolyn, always greeted me warmly and bragged about me to her friends. Jack, Melissa's father, not only loved me but was very impressed with my business acumen. He wanted me to move to work for one of the companies he owned, but I told him I wanted to separate my business life from his and go my own way. I never wanted anyone to assume that I had gotten promotions or responsibilities just because I was a son-in-law. Even though I never worked for him, after 2 years of marriage to his daughter, Jack insisted that I set up a power of attorney for Melissa's trust fund, somewhere around $15 million, because she had absolutely no business acumen. The trust fund money was to go to her as soon as she turned 30, but I was responsible for every bit of it, except for about $3 million worth of preferred stock in one of Jack's companies, which couldn't be touched until Melissa turned 32, and even after that there were restrictions. Married life had gone well for me, even though I had learned something about Melissa that I had never noticed during our courtship, which was not surprising given my lack of discernment. She was more materialistic and much more concerned with her status in society than I had realized before we married. In fact, how she was treated by the rich, successful, and upper-class people in our metropolis was one of the most important things in her life. Despite the revelations about Melissa, which caused some anxiety, I was happy in our marriage. Melissa seemed to be there for me when I needed her, such as vigilantly supporting me when my parents, my only relatives I cared for, died in a car accident after we had been married for 3 years. The money I received from my parents' inheritance, after taxes and expenses, I put into an offshore account. I never told Melissa about it, and she never asked. We didn't need the money to have the lifestyle we wanted, but it was a significant amount of money, on the order of $1 million. I intended to tell her that I had transferred it to an offshore account, but never got my act together. Maybe for some Freudian reason I didn't. I really don't know. When Melissa and I had just turned 29, our birth dates were only 3 days apart, we decided that she would stop taking birth control pills and we would have children, something we had always agreed to do since we got engaged. Even with my usual inattentiveness, it seemed to me that when she stopped taking the pill, her libido increased. Her libido had always been what I considered normal given my experience with the other 6 women I had sexual relationships with before marriage, so we usually had very good sex 3 or 4 times a week. After she stopped taking the pill, it seemed that she became more sexually aggressive and energetic during sex, and our frequency increased to 5 or 6 times a week. Even though she stopped taking the pill, it took her a while to get pregnant. We both realized that it would probably be at least a couple months before she got pregnant, so it didn't scare either of us. As I mentioned earlier, I treat everyone with respect, which made me popular with the country club staff to which Melissa, myself, Jack, and Carolyn belonged. I didn't actually play golf or tennis much because I just don't have the necessary hand-eye coordination. But I enjoyed eating lunch there, swimming, and playing cards. Some employees loved and trusted me enough to come to me with business problems, and I always did my best to help them. Perhaps the friendliest employee I became friends with was Jasper, the waiter captain at the golf grill. One Saturday morning at the clubhouse, as per our standard procedure, Melissa headed out for a golf lesson while I intended to swim and relax by the pool since it had been a particularly busy week at work. I stayed late, talking to a few people, and as I approached the locker room, Jasper came up to me with a very concerned look on his face. "Brent," he said, "I insisted that all the staff call me by my first name, although Melissa wanted them to call her Mrs. Willis. Can I talk to you for a minute?" "Sure," I replied, expecting it to be about some financial problems he was having. Jasper took me to a secluded corner. Tears welled up in his eyes, and when I asked worriedly, "What's wrong?" he blurted out, "I hate to tell you this, Brent, but your wife is cheating on you right now as we speak." "What?" I asked in horror. "I've suspected it for 2 weeks, but today I became convinced. She's with Jeremy, a professional golfer's assistant at Massage Parlor A. Apparently the lock on the door is broken, but they don't know that. I opened the door by mistake and saw them, even though they didn't see me. Go take a look now. I'm pretty sure the paint peeled off my face and I almost fell to my knees. I had to hold on to the back of my chair for a few seconds to regain my balance. Not being one for confrontation, there was no way I would challenge Melissa if I caught them, but I had to know. I took a quick step toward Massage Room A, which had a Do Not Disturb sign hanging on the door. I pried it open. The lock didn't work, just like Jasper had said. Melissa was on all fours on the massage table. She moaned, "Harder, take me harder." Before I closed the door, I noticed he was wearing a condom, but my vision quickly blurred after that. Closing the door behind me, I collapsed to the floor. My mind was a mess. To say I was devastated would be the understatement of the decade. I finally came to my senses enough to realize I had to get out of there. Hurrying out of the building, I passed Jasper and managed to squeeze myself out. "Thank you for telling me, but please don't tell anyone else under any circumstances," before tears came to my eyes. Jasper replied with genuine concern in his voice. "I get it. I'm sorry." I drove through the fog until I came across an open bar. It was a relatively upscale bar in a nice part of town, actually in the suburb where Doreen's parents lived, near several restaurants and clubs. I almost never drank hard liquor and rarely had more than 2 glasses of wine a day, if at all. I was completely drunk, sitting alone at a table in the corner of the bar. By the time I stumbled out of the bar, it was already dark and I was completely drunk. My plan was to get in my car, not buckle up, crash into a brick wall, and crash to my death. Obviously, I didn't factor in the airbag. The last thing I remember is falling. What happened for the next 12 hours, I know only from other people's accounts. I woke up in an unfamiliar environment. It was like a guest room in a dormitory. I was dressed in the same clothes I had left the country club in. I had a splitting headache and otherwise felt lousy. Unfortunately, I hadn't forgotten the cause of my ailment, so I felt worse emotionally than physically. I slowly walked out of the room I was in, found the restroom, and after I'd finished my need to pee, I looked in the mirror. I looked as bad as I felt, including a large bump and scratch on my head. I thought I recognized the second-floor hallway I was in, but couldn't remember where I was. I heard the sounds of cooking and people talking on the first floor, so I stumbled down the stairs. I was shocked to see Doreen's parents, Tom and Lydia Bronson, in the kitchen. "Well, Brent, it's good to see you among the living," Tom said, looking at me over his reading glasses and setting aside the newspaper. "Hey, Brent, breakfast will be ready soon," Lydia chirped, standing by the stove. "Tom, Lydia, I have no idea how I got here," I mumbled. "Have a seat, Brent," Tom said, standing up and helping me to one of the kitchen chairs, "and I'll tell you the story." "Thank you, because I don't remember anything after leaving the bar, I believe, last night and trying to find my car," I mumbled. Tom continued to tell my story, with Lydia inserting comments from time to time. Anyway, Tom and Lydia were going to meet some friends at a restaurant about a block away from the bar I had left. As they were walking towards the restaurant, they saw a guy fall and hit his head on the sidewalk and came over to help. When they realized it was me, Lydia went to get their friends. They and their friends helped me into the car and drove me to their house, canceling their dinner plans and ordering takeout with their friends. "I am very, very grateful to you for helping me," I said. "I'm especially grateful to you for bringing me here and not to a sobering house or a hospital." As Lydia brought pancakes and juice to the table, she said, "Given what you've been mumbling, we thought it would be best to just bring you here. Have some food, you need it." "What did I say?" I asked, completely confused. "It can wait until after breakfast," Lydia replied, setting me down a stack of hot pancakes. Over breakfast, the three of us talked about many things, but not about last night. Of course, I asked about Doreen, and was told that she had been married for 3 years but was now divorced and back in the area, living only 15 kilometers away. She was a successful entrepreneur. "Is she still as beautiful as she was in college?" I asked wistfully. "You'll have to judge that for yourself. She'll be here soon," Tom answered. "What?" I shrieked. "She mustn't see me like this." "She won't mind," Lydia said carelessly. "She can't wait to see you, especially if what you muttered last night is true." By then breakfast was eaten, and after I helped clear the table, the three of us moved into their living room. "What did I say last night?" I asked timidly. "There's no point in telling you everything," Tom said thoughtfully. "Let me focus on the highlights. The little-known ones, rather. Your wife, Melissa, cheated on you. There's no way you would have started a family under those circumstances. You drank hard liquor for the first time in 2 years to drown out your sorrows, and you planned to kill yourself. Does that sum it up?" "It's close," Lydia replied with a puzzled expression on her face. I covered my face with my hands. After about a minute, I looked up. "I'm really, really sorry to burden you with my problems," I said, barely holding back tears. "I really, really don't know what I'm going to do, but I probably would have killed myself last night if I could have gotten to my car. I think you two know that I'm very emotional," I continued, panting. "Sensitivity is a quality I've always admired in you, Brent, but maybe you're too sensitive for your own good," Lydia said, walking over to me and taking my hand. After we talked in generalities for a few more minutes, the front door opened and Doreen walked in. Except for a blonde strand in her hair, Doreen looked pretty much the same as the last time I'd seen her 8 years ago. If anything, she looked a little better. I was very nervous about what her reaction to me would be. I got the nicest surprise of my life. "Hi, Brent," she said in such a happy voice that it was as if my breakup with her 8 years ago had never happened. "You look awful," she giggled, "but I still need your hug." She held out her arms and I took them. She lifted me off the couch and hugged me tightly. After a few seconds of misgivings, I hugged her back and then started sobbing. Lydia diffused the situation. "I think you two have some catching up to do. Tom and I are going to go shopping at the mall and we'll be back in 2 hours," Lydia said, squeezing my shoulder. I seriously doubt Tom had planned to go shopping on Sunday morning, but he pretended it was the most fun thing he'd ever done in his life, and off they went. As soon as they left, Doreen got straight to the point. "Brent, you know we've both always been honest with each other. Is there any reason why that should change now?" After a short pause, looking into Doreen's beautiful brown eyes, I hesitantly said, "No, I really need a friend right now, someone I could be honest with." "Okay," she said with a smile. "Let me start. My marriage broke up because my husband cheated on me. I can't blame him much, though, because I'm sure he felt that there was only one man I had ever loved or was likely to ever love, and it wasn't him. It was you. From what my parents tell me, I may have a chance to win you back, and if I do, I intend to take full advantage of it. I don't think I'd be any more stunned than if I'd been hit with taser electrodes. I'm sure my mouth was open, and my eyes became the size of baseballs as I seemed to be at a prolonged loss for words, all the while looking into Doreen's eyes, and she stared back at me. Finally, she broke the silence. "Is that straightforward enough for you?" she asked with a wry smile. "Yeah, I'd say it was definitely straightforward enough," I chuckled. "I guess I made the wrong choice 8 years ago," I continued. "That's the right attitude. Now let's deal with it," Doreen continued with a wide smile. "Let's sit down at the kitchen table and take notes on how things are going to go from here." So we headed to the kitchen. Doreen got a notebook and pen out of the living room desk drawer, and we got down to business. Apparently, I was a complete idiot last night when I was in a drunken stupor, because Doreen seemed to know all the important details of my situation. I had just cleared some things up for her. I had made it clear in our conversations that I wanted revenge on Melissa for real, no matter what else we did, and I wanted to be as far away from her as possible. By the time Tom and Lydia returned 2 hours later and brought Doreen and I 2 full coffee pots of coffee, Doreen and I already had the general principles of a plan of action going forward. In developing this plan, I kept repeating my need for final revenge and the dissolution of the marriage. She told me she would do anything to help, just so I would stay with her, and the ideas came flooding in. We each made a list of what needs to be done, a list of things to avoid, and a list of possible serious mistakes. We promised to meet for lunch every other day to refine things and see how we were doing. We really only needed to trust 2 people, Tom and Lydia. Well, maybe Jasper, too. Neither of us had a problem trusting Tom and Lydia, and they were honored that we trusted them. We told them exactly as much as was necessary. I figured I could trust Jasper, too. The most pressing problem was explaining to Melissa how and why I had been gone since yesterday afternoon, which was more than 24 hours, since I looked terrible, including a bump and scratch on my head after passing out on the sidewalk. We were sure it was doable. Doreen drove me to where I had left my car. Fortunately, it was in one piece. I left my cell phone in the car. I checked the messages on my cell phone. There were 10 from Melissa and 1 from her father, Jack. The first one, in chronological order, was from Jasper. "Hey, Brent," Jasper texted. "Just thought I'd let you know that I saw Melissa. She asked if I'd seen you. I told her that you had an emergency and were looking all over for her, including on the practice field, but couldn't find her or Jeremy, so you left, instructing me to tell her that you would contact her as soon as your emergency was resolved and to take a cab home." She had a very upset look on her face, but she totally believed my story. "Good luck, kid, and let me know if there's anything I can do to help." The messages from Melissa and Jack were about the same, with a growing level of concern about my whereabouts. Doreen and I decided that I would call Melissa, tell her that I had been attacked and taken to the clinic without ID, that I'd be home in about an hour. I made the call. Melissa's voice sounded worried when she picked up the phone and relieved at the same time. I cut the conversation short. Doreen and I kissed, not that passionately, but not just as good friends. I have to stay loyal to Melissa until our plan comes to fruition, I said to Doreen. That doesn't surprise me, Doreen said with a wide smile. However, once that happens, I'm going to fuck you to death. She grinned. Woe is me, I replied dramatically. The only thing that worries me is whether you'll be able to behave properly with Melissa without arousing her suspicion, Doreen said. That's my biggest concern, too, I replied, considering how emotional I am. But you've given me the courage to do it since I know there's a pot of gold at the other end of the rainbow. I'll find a way, I said with a determined look on my face. Doreen smiled, we exchanged another quick kiss, and I left, first to buy Plan B pills and a disposable phone at the pharmacy, and then to go home. Melissa and her parents were on the verge of hysterics when I got home. My appearance gave them no reason to doubt my story of assault, as my head injury was real, my clothes dirty and disheveled, and my hair tangled. I hid my wallet in my car and pretended I needed to get my new credit cards and driver's license since they had been stolen, though thankfully my car keys weren't there. The presence of Melissa's parents helped. I probably wouldn't have been able to pull it off if they hadn't been around, as the sight of Melissa made my anger boil over. But I remained relatively calm and played the disoriented victim to the end. Given her actions on Saturday, I was actually surprised that Melissa seemed very genuine in her concern for me, and there was no doubt that she hadn't slept last night. She looked almost as bad as I did. Her parents decided to stay the night. After Melissa and I showered and ate a meal prepared by her mother, Carolyn, we passed out and fell asleep again. I got goosebumps running down my spine when she laid her head on my shoulder, but I managed it, and within minutes, I was in an incredible land. For the next 3 weeks, things went pretty much as Doreen and I had planned. Doreen, more than anyone I had ever seen, was diligent in accomplishing her tasks. After meeting her twice over lunch, I had no doubt that I should have married her instead of Melissa. All my previous feelings for her returned with renewed vigor, and I was impressed with her dedication, competence, and efficiency. There was much to be done, and it was not easy. Since I was having difficulty interacting with Melissa, I wanted to stay on schedule despite the many minor setbacks. To avoid arousing suspicion and to satisfy her heightened libido, I even had sex with Melissa 8 times. Each time I imagined it was Doreen, and the morning after each session I would crush up a Plan B pill and add it to the breakfast I lovingly prepared for Melissa and watch her to make sure she ate it before I left for work. No way in hell would I want to have a baby with her. It sounds strange considering how terribly upset and devastated I was when I witnessed Melissa cheating. But 3 Saturdays after that horrible event, I was hoping that Melissa would start cheating again. I needed her to cheat in order to carry out my plan. Using the disposable cell phone I bought at the same time as the Plan B pills, I called Doreen first thing Saturday morning to make sure everything was going right. It was. I kissed Melissa one last time as we parted Saturday morning at the country club. She was off to her golf lesson, and I was off to swim. I tracked down Jasper, made him promise never to tell anyone that he had told me about Melissa's affair or that I had witnessed it 3 weeks earlier, and gave him $10,000 in cash. After waiting another 20 minutes, I surreptitiously removed the Do Not Disturb sign from the door of Massage Room A and verified that the lock was still broken and that Melissa and Jeremy were inside. I then enlisted the help of the club's training center director and head golf professional, ostensibly to find Melissa, telling them in desperation, "I have a very urgent situation." I coaxed the other two to have the head golf professional open the door to Massage Room A. As expected, assistant golf pro Jeremy was there, having Melissa doggy style. I noticed the condom again, thank goodness for small favors. The head golf pro blurted out, "What the fuck?" and the director of the training center loudly awed. I yelled, "Melissa!" The coupled couple looked at us with completely horrified and distressed faces. Melissa shrieked. Jeremy quickly tried to pull up his pants that were down around his ankles. A completely distraught expression appeared on my face, which wasn't hard to do, given the circumstances, and certainly required no action on my part. And then I turned and ran, sobbing. The sobbing was a pretense, though inside my heart was bleeding. As I left the practice area, I heard the head golf professional yelling at Jeremy. I quickly drove home and left a note with my wedding ring already prepared on the kitchen table. I also left my regular cell phone there as I didn't want to risk being tracked on it. 2 weeks earlier, I had my location devices disabled on both my car and my laptop. My laptop and a suitcase with the only things I valued, a few souvenirs from my parents, and a few changes of underwear and socks were already in the trunk of my car. My note read, "I loved you more than life. I can't live with your betrayal. God save my soul." I don't know how Melissa managed to get home so quickly, but she got there before I left. I would have preferred not to see her, but May worked out for the best as she partially satisfied my thirst for revenge. Melissa was truly gripped by panic. She kept grabbing me and I kept lashing out. She tried to meet my gaze and I avoided it. She was yelling things like, "I got too horny when I stopped taking the pill. I'm hormonal. It was just sex. I made him always use a condom. I need to have a baby with you. And what will my parents say if you leave?" The only thing I said in response to all of her hysterical tirades was a truly emotional response to the last question. "Tell them you killed our love and me." Tears stood in my eyes as I pushed her away from me and ran out the door. One part of my revenge required that I act on Monday to make sure everything went through, since money transfers couldn't be reliably confirmed over the weekend at most institutions. Doreen had rented a hotel room in her name in a busy part of town, and I parked my car in a remote part of another hotel about a block away from where she and I were staying for Saturday and Sunday. Although Doreen and I slept together and were affectionate during the 2 nights we stayed at the hotel, we did not have sex. I needed to supposedly die before it could happen, but I knew that once it did, it would be incredibly passionate. In accordance with our plan, I changed my appearance as much as I could in the time allotted. Doreen cut my hair much shorter than I normally wear, dyed it a lighter color, and styled it differently. I put on blue contact lenses to hide my usually green irises and glasses with simple plastic lenses. I glued on a professional blonde mustache that looked completely real and wore clothes Doreen had bought for me that were very different from what I usually wore. On Saturdays and Sundays, Doreen and I went to the movie theater next to the hotel, ordered room service food, and discussed our plans over and over again so that we could remember every detail by heart. On Monday morning, I made electronic transfers of about $12 billion worth of assets from Melissa's trust fund, which I legally had full control of, to 6 different charities for which Doreen and I had obtained all the necessary transfer information electronically. 5 of the transfers were made. The 6th was not, and there was no time to try to get information on another charity, so we had to limit ourselves to 5 transfers. One of the 6 charities had been set up by Doreen several years ago, and she still had operational control of it. After we had transferred the money and received confirmation that it had been honored, Doreen drove me to my car. That's when there was a major glitch in our plans. I had underestimated my father-in-law's determination and influence. Apparently, he had sent virtually every law enforcement officer in town to find my car, because when we got to it, there was a patrol car with a police officer sitting in it right next to it. We needed my car because it had been specially modified to fulfill a major part of our plan. We had made some contingency plans, including buying a masquerade for Doreen and a spare costume for me. The resourceful Doreen immediately came up with a solution. She changed her clothes, ran up to the patrol car, and told the officer in desperation, "There's a guy with a gun in the hotel lobby." The cop immediately turned on his radio and drove from the remote part of the parking lot where my car was parked to the main entrance of the hotel. As soon as he was out of sight, I ran to my car, jumped in, and Doreen and I drove to the remote coastal mountain road where I had modified the guardrail. As I drove to the site of my suicide, with Doreen following at my heels, I pressed a button on my laptop that sent all the emails that Doreen and I had carefully written over the past 3 weeks. The emails were designed to be sent every few minutes. It took us about an hour to get to the right place, and by then, all the emails would have been delivered. Doreen did a great job of composing the emails, still using some of my winged phrases and other writing features so that it felt like they were coming from me, but were much more concise and effective. The emails basically said that I was too weak a person to survive the betrayal caused by my wife's cheating sex and apologized for leaving my life without saying goodbye in person. The emails contained statements about the pain and anguish I was experiencing far more effectively than I could express, although these statements were 95% accurate in expressing my true feelings. The letter addressed to my father-in-law, Jack, was the most touching. I apologized to him that my need for both suicide and revenge was so great that I had undermined his trust in me by emptying Melissa's trust fund and hoped he would find the strength to eventually forgive me. The location for the suicide was carefully chosen. There was a steep descent from the mountain road into a part of the ocean that had strong but ever-changing undercurrents. Anyone but the most imaginative explorer would have concluded that no one could have survived the fall from the cliff and that the human body might never be found, and certainly there was no way to accurately predict where it might end up, unless it was shattered by waves and rocks or eaten by sea creatures. A few days earlier, I had smeared acid on the bolts in one part of the fence at the suicide spot, and then another material that could mimic natural corrosion. My car had been modified so that when remotely controlled, the gas pedal rod in the engine compartment would be pushed forward. But when it reached the end of its travel, a small explosive device would be detonated, most likely destroying it. Doreen and I parked our cars on the side of the road near the suicide site. We looked through binoculars until we were sure there were no other vehicles within sight. I then positioned my car so that it was facing the fence and was about 30 meters from where the fence bolts had been loosened. I turned on the remote control so that the car picked up speed. When my car hit the weakened fence, there was just enough inertia for it to break and fall off the cliff, landing in the ocean 100 meters below. Doreen and I also deactivated the driver's side airbag in my car and soaked my blood and tissue into the part of the leather upholstery of the steering wheel that my head could hit in the event of a crash. We also applied my fresh blood to the leather steering wheel upholstery, but soaked it to make sure some blood would remain in case the fresh blood got washed away by the ocean waves. The car windows were open, my seatbelt wasn't fastened, and my wallet was lying loose in the car, so at some point it would surely float to the surface and hopefully be retrieved by divers. As soon as we saw the car hit the water, we got into Doreen's car and drove off. We drove 600 kilometers that day and another 600 the next, paying for everything in cash, until we reached our destination city, where Doreen arranged to get a document that would help establish my new identity. We spent the first 2 days and 3 nights in our original destination city in a hotel room. This time, we didn't just order room service food. We were fucking each other to mind-blowing levels. I expected my traumatic experience with Melissa to suppress my sexual abilities for a while. In fact, the opposite was true. Much of that had to do with Doreen's absolute devotion to me, which she had clearly demonstrated by perfectly planning and executing my escape, and how sexy she was. I quickly discovered that Doreen had not only gotten a little prettier over the past 8 years, but had also become considerably more passionate. So much so that on our first time together, I had abandoned my usual gentle lovemaking and we had fucked each other half to death. After that, we alternated between tender lovemaking and animal fucking, more times in 2 days and 3 nights than I thought was humanly possible, at least for me. After this period of constant fucking, fondling with fingers, tongue, toy action, and sucking, we had to take a break. We were both sore all over and could barely walk or pee without pain. Before we left our hometown, Doreen received a certified copy of the birth certificate of a child named Alex Simmons. Alex was born in a rural area with no computerized records just a year before me and died shortly after his birth. In our original destination city, using the photo with my new appearance, we purchased a fake Australian passport in the name of Alex Simmons. Doreen found out that Australian passports are the easiest to forge, and 2 weeks ago found an experienced professional in our original destination city. My fake passport was in perfect condition. It even had fake stamps for travel to Thailand and from 2 other Asian countries, a fake stamp for entering the U.S. a month ago, and a tattered look. This would readily confirm my story that I was a Native American who had moved to Australia as a child and was now returning. With my new birth certificate and passport in hand, we drove leisurely to our final destination, located on the opposite coast from our hometown. We made it a rule to fuck in every state we passed through, even if it was just for an hour in a motel. When we reached our final destination, we rented an apartment and finalized plans to start our new life together. I had already transferred the money I had inherited from Brent Willis's offshore account to a new offshore account in the name of Alex Simmons. Using my birth certificate and Alex Simmons's Australian passport, I was able to open a U.S. bank account and transfer some of the money from the offshore account into it. 6 weeks later, I had my driver's license, credit cards, and all the other usual identity documents. 6 months later, Alex Simmons had a U.S. passport. As we traveled, escaping my old life, we communicated regularly with Doreen's parents and checked internet sources for stories about Brent Willis. Things were not working out well for Melissa. Within a week of my suicide, my car was lifted out of the ocean with a crane barge. Divers found my wallet and almost everyone I knew was interviewed, and my financial records were scrutinized. Since I'd only received $30,000 in cash in the 3 weeks before my demise, all from transactions that appeared to be mostly legitimate, not true cash transactions, since it was not an excessive amount given my lifestyle, and since there was absolutely no activity in any of my banks, credit card, or brokerage accounts, it was assumed that I was dead. Shortly thereafter, my death was confirmed by a scientific examination of my automobile. Technicians extracted my blood and tissue from the leather upholstery of the steering wheel. The clumsy, intentionally clumsy on my part, disabling of the driver's side airbag in my car, as well as my suicide note to Melissa and suicide emails to everyone I knew, left the public in no doubt that I had committed suicide. From everything I understood, the public judgment of Melissa and Jeremy was extremely harsh. Of course, Jeremy lost his job immediately, and all indications were that the country club's head professional would make sure that he would never again get a golf-related job anywhere in the United States. He reportedly left town a week after he was caught with Melissa. Melissa was an outcast in high society circles. She had even suffered the humiliation of being expelled from the country club, though she would undoubtedly have quit of her own accord. Attempts by local reporters to interview her were unsuccessful, and there was no indication that she had ever left the space that used to be our apartment. Unfortunately, the realization of my plan resulted in Jack and Carolyn, Melissa's parents, getting hurt. I always knew they liked me, but I didn't realize they loved me as a son. One quote from Jack, published in the city's largest newspaper, brought me to tears. "Our beloved son is dead, betrayed by his wife. Please respect our privacy and allow us to grieve our terrible loss." We had each other to the point of mind-blowing. After that, we alternated between tender lovemaking and animal sex, more times in 2 days and 3 nights than I thought was humanly possible, at least for me. After this period of constant sex, fondling with fingers, tongue, toy action, we had to take a break. We made it a habit to have fun in every state we passed through, even if it was just for an hour in a motel. Doreen and I had just started our new life in our apartment when Tom and Lydia informed us that Jack and Carolyn were going to hold a memorial service for me. Although it was still a long time before I was officially pronounced dead, there was no one who didn't believe that I had committed suicide. Doreen decided she would attend the service and flew from our new town back to her hometown. When Doreen returned, I realized that she was hiding something from me about the ceremony. She tried to take it lightly, but I wouldn't stand for it. A couple days later, when I pestered her, she told me in tears about how awful it had been. People I didn't really know apparently felt strongly about me. It was a very solemn occasion. Jack broke down several times trying to deliver the eulogy his brother was to finish. Carolyn looked like a grief-stricken woman and sobbed quietly throughout the service. Melissa was not on it. It was reported that she was in a mental institution. Not only did Melissa's family make no attempt to return the $10 million I had sent to charity from Melissa's trust fund, but they gave another $2 million, the amount I intended to send but failed to another charity in my name. My memorial service took place 4 years ago. I was officially declared dead 2 years after that. Doreen and I were married as soon as Brent Willis was pronounced dead. We are now Mr. and Mrs. Simmons. We already had a little girl when we got married, and now we have a little boy on the way. Doreen and I have no money problems. In addition to my inheritance, we have money from the sale of Doreen's business to her employees and the salary we receive from the charity we work for. Since the charity that Doreen founded received a $2 million donation, they have had enough money to hire her as their full-time COO and me as their CFO and investment advisor. Through philanthropy, we were able to help hundreds of low-income families and derive tremendous satisfaction from our work, including expanding our operations each year. Tom retired, and he and Lydia moved to a place only 20 kilometers from our home to be close to us, and especially to their granddaughter and future grandson. I love Doreen more than I ever loved Melissa, and she loves me more than Melissa ever loved me. It makes me feel guilty that I didn't choose her after college. This whole mess with Melissa and her family could have been avoided. I gave up trying to find out what happened to Melissa, Jack, and Carolyn. The news was never good and only made me feel more guilty. The last I heard was that Jack and Carolyn had set up a scholarship in my name at the college Melissa, Doreen, and I attended. Melissa got out of the psychiatric hospital after 6 months of treatment and moved away. Doreen and I could not have been happier with each other and our life together, except for one thing. We could not feel more guilt than the guilt we feel because of how successful my revenge was. We now know that even the guilty Melissa, not to mention the innocent Jack and Carolyn, didn't deserve what we did to them. I wish I hadn't been such a cowardly shit, hadn't stood up to Melissa and just divorced her.
What if is a bitch?